There is a question that anyone who passed Vera Nolan's place in the autumn of 1934 would have carried home with them, turning it over at the supper table, setting it beside the lamp at night, unable to quite put it down. The question was this: what does a woman expect to accomplish by dragging home 18 wagon loads of rotting carrots? Not seed carrots, not table carrots, not even canning grade seconds. Cull carrots. The kind the packing shed foreman threw into the discard rows without a second look. The soft ones, the forked ones, the ones with wire worm galleries running through them like tiny, dark corridors. Carrots that no grocer would touch, that no neighbor would have taken for free on a normal year, and that Vera Nolan hauled home one creaking wagon load at a time across 6 weeks of October and November, while the rest of the county watched and drew its own conclusions. The question followed her. She did not answer it. She unhitched the mule, forked the load into the pit she had dug along the north side of the barn, tamped the layers with straw and soil the way the book said, and went inside to eat. The question was still there in the morning. She went out and answered it the only way she ever answered anything. She kept working. The winter of 1934 into 1935 was not yet a known catastrophe when Vera started hauling. The drought had been bad, yes, the summer brutal, and the pastures had gone to dust by August. But the extension man, Mr. Calvin Pruitt, had come out to the county in September with a calm, authoritative manner and a briefcase full of mimeographed bulletins that told a different story. He sat at the kitchen tables of the district's livestock operations and explained with the patient confidence of a man who has read every relevant report that the federal government was prepared, that emergency feed shipments were arranged, that the livestock operations of this district were not in the kind of jeopardy that warranted, say, extraordinary or unorthodox measures. He used the word unorthodox the way a doctor uses the word inadvisable, with a kindness built in that was meant to soften what was otherwise a plain instruction to stop. He sat at Vera's table, too, the second week of October, and accepted her coffee and told her what he told the others. He said the Cull Carrot project was understandable, given her circumstances, given that she was managing the place alone, given the anxiety that such a season naturally produced. He said the word anxiety gently. Vera listened. She poured more coffee. She said the pit was already dug. He said he understood. He left. She went back to the barn. The book she was working from was not a government bulletin. It was a hand-stitched ledger, linen-covered, the ink faded to a pale brown in the way of writing done in another century. And it had belonged to her mother's father, a man named August Holt, who had come overland in 1879 and homesteaded the first rough years in this same stretch of country. August Holt had survived 2 winters in those early years that broke nearly every other operation in the region, and he had written down in his deliberate slanted hand exactly what he had done and why. He wrote without drama and without vanity. He noted weights and dates. He noted what his animals ate and how much and at what point in the winter their condition began to decline and at what point it steadied. He noted the mineral content he believed root vegetables contributed to wintering stock, based on the observed behavior of deer and elk on the range in hard seasons. He noted temperatures, snowfall, wind direction. He wrote in February of 1882 a sentence that Vera had read so many times the page had softened under her finger. The body of an animal that has been fed roots through the cold months is a different body than one fed only dry hay. It carries water, minerals, and something else I have no name for, but which I think of as readiness. You can see it in the eye. She had found the ledger in a trunk after her mother died in the spring of 1933, and she had read it the way a person reads a letter addressed specifically to them. Slowly, twice, with the sensation that the words had been waiting. She ran 43 head of mixed stock, 21 cows, 9 yearling steers, 8 heifers, 4 horses, and the mule. She had done the arithmetic in the margin of a seed catalog. A hard winter on dry hay alone would cost her somewhere between a third and half the herd by March, based on August's records and based on the state of her hay supply, which was poor. She had 11 tons cut and stacked, and that was not enough. She needed something else. The packing shed at Drover's Flats had the something else piled in its discard rows, and the foreman there, a red-faced man named Bud Ketchum, who found the whole arrangement faintly ridiculous, had agreed to let her take what she wanted at no charge, on the condition that she hauled it herself and cleared the rows before the first hard freeze. She had shaken his hand on it. She had gone home and built the pit. The pit was 12 feet wide and 4 feet deep and ran 40 feet along the north wall of the barn, which faced away from the prevailing winter wind and was partially banked by earth on 3 sides. She had read August's specifications 3 times before she broke ground. The walls of the pit were lined with straw bales stacked too high. The floor was bare earth. Each load of carrots went in loose, forked off the wagon, and spread to a depth of roughly 18 inches, then covered with a layer of straw 8 inches thick, then a layer of soil 2 inches thick, then more carrots, then more straw, then more soil, and so on, until the pit held the entire volume of all 18 loads, and the final cap was 18 inches of packed straw, weighted with the heaviest planks she could drag from the lumber pile. She had a neighbor's boy, a 14-year-old named Ernest Gale, whose father worked a tenant claim 2 miles east to help her with the final stacking. Ernest did not ask questions. He worked. At the end of the last day, she paid him with a warm meal, and he sat at her table eating in the focused way of a boy who has been genuinely useful and knows it. He looked at the ledger on the table. He asked what it was. She said it was directions. He said directions to what? She said to march. Through November, the skepticism of the neighborhood passed through several distinct phases, as skepticism in small communities tends to do. First came the open amusement, neighbors at the post office laughing about the carrot woman, about the smell that came off the loads, about the futility of saving what the packing shed had thrown away. Then came the more complicated phase, the one with pity in it, when Mabel Sorensen drove out with a jar of honey and a loaf of bread and sat in Vera's kitchen and said that the community was worried about her, that they understood it had been a hard year, that Vera's late husband Clem, God rest him, had always been the one who handled feed procurement, and it was understandable that she might feel uncertain without him. Mabel sat with her hands folded, and her expression arranged in the particular way of a person delivering concern that is also, in its deep structure, a verdict. Vera thanked her for the bread. She offered nothing in return that Mabel could carry back and report as evidence of breakdown. The third phase, after Mabel's visit, was the aristocratic variety, delivered by Harold Grange, who ran the largest operation in the county, a man of 300 acres, and a certain confidence that comes from never having been meaningfully wrong about anything in one's own memory. Harold stopped his truck at the gate one afternoon in late November and leaned out the window and said, from a comfortable distance, that he did not know what she expected those carrots to do, but that he had it on very good authority from the Extension Office that the federal feed program would be delivering supplemental hay to the district by the 15th of December. He said the carrots would freeze solid and be worthless. He said he meant no offense. He said it the way people say things they mean all the offense of, but have learned to package more tidily. Vera looked at the sky over his shoulder. She said the pit was insulated. He drove away. She went back inside and updated the ledger in the margin of August's entry for December 1881, matching what she observed with what he had observed, checking the correlation. Ernest Gale came back in December on his own, on a Saturday, having apparently thought the matter over during the intervening weeks. He stood at the barn door and said he had read about root cellaring in the school library, and he thought she had done it right. She said she thought so too. He said he would like to learn more of it if she did not mind. She said he could come on weekends if his father allowed. He went home and asked, and came back the following Saturday with his work gloves, and without further explanation. They checked the pit's temperature together, pushing a rod down through the straw cap and drawing it out to feel the retained coolness. They checked the outer bales for frost penetration. They checked the animals, moving through the barn in the low, gray December light, running hands along spines and checking eyes and noting weights in the ledger. Ernest wrote in a careful hand. He was a quick learner, and he did not perform his observations, which Vera respected more than she said. The body of an animal that has been fed roots through the cold months is a different body. That was what August had written. Vera began feeding from the pit on the 1st of December, rationing carefully, 3 to 4 pounds of carrots per animal per day, split over 2 feedings, supplementing the dry hay rather than replacing it. She watched for what her grandfather had noted. She watched the eyes. Through December and into January, while the country dried and the feed situation darkened, and Mr. Pruitt's promised December shipment became a January shipment, and then a February possibility, and then a federal delay that the bulletin described in passive voice language designed to absorb blame without locating it. Vera's animals ate their carrots and their hay and held their condition in a way that was, if one had eyes for it, quietly remarkable. Ernest had eyes for it. He said one Saturday in January that the yearlings looked better than they should. She said yes. He wrote it down. The winter broke open in the 3rd week of January, not with snow, which they had been promised, and which would at least have meant water, but with a cold so dry and absolute that it seemed less like weather than like a condition of the universe, something permanent that had been waiting behind the normal air to be revealed. The temperature at Vera's place dropped to 31 below on the morning of January the 22nd, and did not rise above 0 for 11 consecutive days. The creek froze to its bed. The windmill froze in its tower. 2 of Harold Grange's horses died on the 24th. The federal feed shipment, already delayed, now sat on frozen rail lines 2 states east and moved no further. The hay supplies of the district, already strained, were now being burned through at crisis rates, as animals burned every calorie they consumed just to maintain body heat, and there was nothing in the pipeline to replace what was going. The emergency, which Mr. Pruitt had gently advised against anticipating, had arrived. Vera rose at 4 each morning in those 11 days. She hauled water from the barrel she kept inside the barn, heated on the small cast-iron stove she had lit for the first time in November as a prophylactic measure, understanding that a frozen barn could kill as quickly as starvation. She fed the hay, and she fed the carrots, working through the straw cap with a fork, pulling the loads up into the lantern light. The carrots cold, but not frozen, still carrying their particular dense, watery weight, still carrying, as August had written, something else he had no name for. She fed each animal by hand through the worst nights. She did not sleep more than 4 hours. She lost no animals. Not one. Ernest came on the 5th day of the freeze, having walked 2 miles in the dark because his father's truck would not start. He appeared at the barn door with ice in his eyebrows and said his father's 2 cows were in trouble, and did she have anything to spare? She did. She sent him back with 100 pounds of carrots in a sack on the sled, and a copy she had made, in her own hand, of August's feeding specifications. His father's cows survived. Ernest came back the next day and helped Vera through the morning feeding, and then walked home again and did not make a production of either trip. On the morning of January the 28th, which was the 6th day of the deep freeze, Harold Grange drove up the lane in his truck, going very slowly on the ice, and stopped at the gate. He sat in the truck for a moment before he got out. He was a man who wore his self-assurance like a garment, and he was wearing it differently now, or rather, he was wearing what was left of it, which was not much, and the diminishment showed in the way he held himself at the gate, one hand on the post, looking not at Vera, but at the barn. He said he had lost 3 horses. He said he had 6 cows that would not last another week. He said he did not know if she had anything. He did not know what she had done with those carrots. He had heard from the Gale boy's father that she had something that was holding. He stopped. The stopping cost him. You could see the cost of it. Vera stood in the barn door with the fork still in her hand and looked at him for a moment without expression. The cold between them was enormous. She said, "Come and look at the pit." He came. She showed him the remaining stock, the layers, the insulation, the approximate volume remaining, what she calculated she could spare without risking her own animals through February. She said she could let him have 400 pounds a week at 10 cents per hundredweight, which was not a market price, but was something. And the something was there because she was not running a charity, but because she was not running a punishment either. She was running a farm. He agreed. He looked at her animals for a long moment before he left. He said nothing more about what he had told her in November. She did not make him say it. Word of what Vera had did not travel slowly, because nothing travels slowly in a community that is suffering. By the 1st of February, she had 7 operations drawing from the pit, each one rationed, each one recorded in the ledger. She had done the arithmetic carefully enough that she knew to the nearest 100 pounds what she could distribute and still carry her own herd through to April grass. She came within 90 pounds of her estimate. All 43 of her animals lived. Of the 7 operations she supplied, every one of them held their core breeding stock through to spring. Ernest Gale's father, who had never been one for formal expression, came to the gate one afternoon in March, when the air was beginning to smell like something other than iron, and stood at the fence for a while, and said that he did not think there was another person in the county who would have thought to do what she had done, and then he went home. Vera recorded the date in the ledger. She recorded the temperature. She recorded that the grass along the south-facing slope was beginning to show color. She never made a speech. She never offered herself as an example. She let Ernest Gale borrow the ledger the following autumn, when he was 16, and he spent 2 weekends copying August Holt's full text into a new notebook in his careful hand, and he took the copy home and kept it. When he grew up, he ran his own place, and he ran it with a specific systematic patience that the neighbors noticed, and when they asked about it, he said he had learned it from a woman on the next farm over, who had done her reading and done her arithmetic, and kept her mouth closed about it until the time came. He said she had told him once, during a cold January morning in the lantern light with the carrots coming up through the straw, that the preparation is the answer. You make it in summer for what is coming in winter, and by the time the question is asked, you should already have answered it with your hands. He had written that down too. The ledger, both versions of it, passed through hands across the decades that followed, copied and recopied. The feeding ratios adjusted and annotated by people who had tried them and found them sound. The pit along the north wall of Vera Nolan's barn was still visible in 1962, caved in by then, grown over with volunteer grass, but the outline of it clear to anyone who looked, which by that point almost nobody did. A granddaughter of Ernest Gale, doing a local history project for the County Historical Society in 1971, found the second-generation copy of the ledger in a box of her grandfather's papers and read it through and understood what she had. She had it photographed and deposited with the Historical Society. On the archival envelope, in the Society's standard catalog hand, someone had written a description of contents. Feeding record and observations. A. Holt, 1879 to 1889, with annotations by V. Nolan, 1933 to 1935, and by E. Gale, 1935 to 1960. The description was accurate. It named what the document was without naming what it meant, which is the way with archives, and perhaps with all records that matter. What it meant was written inside, in August, Holt's faded brown ink, in the sentence Vera had carried with her through all of it, the sentence she had read by lamplight in every season. The body of an animal that has been fed roots through the cold months is a different body. It carries water, minerals, and something else I have no name for, but which I think of as readiness. You can see it in the eye. The preparation is the answer. You make it in summer for what is coming in winter. And by the time the question is asked, you should already have answered it with your hands.